guest on the BWI Daily Edition. I'm your host, Thomas Frank Carr. I'm joined by Blue White Illustrated writer Dave Eckert. Dave, thanks so much for coming on, man. Appreciate this.
Yeah, this is great. This is my debut on the BWI multimedia platform that we're building here too. So this is exciting. This is going to be fun.
Yep, we've already had the Daily Edition, of course, and Greg Pickle and Ryan Snyder have their recruiting podcast, which was up yesterday and is always our most watched thing. So if you haven't seen that yet, or if you haven't checked it out wherever you get your podcasts, make sure you subscribe and you hit the notification button on YouTube, because there's a bunch of recruiting news coming out this week, and you don't want to miss any of that good stuff. So we're going to be introducing everybody from Blue White Illustrated here. Dave is just the next person, and we're talking about some fun stuff today, and then an update on a non-football thing. And you're going to have to hold my hand through that one, Dave, okay?
You got
it. So I wanted to talk about, you've been writing a lot of pieces for Blue White about what PFF has been coming out with when it comes to their rankings, their preseason and postseason stuff. The latest one was the pass rushers, and people, because of some of the earlier articles, seem to think that PFF hates Penn State, because that's how it always works out when you don't have something overly positive. So the pass rushing article for PFF, you wrote a recap of it. What did they say about the Penn State pass rushing unit, and where'd they rank it among returning units in the country?
So yeah, this was a positive one. So PFF ranked Penn State's pass rush unit as the 10th best pass rush unit in the country. Obviously they're high on Penn State's front four coming into this season. They had some really nice things to say about the transfers that Penn State added, and Arnold Ebiketie and Derek Tangelo. So yeah, I thought it was an interesting choice. That's kind of why I wrote it. I don't think a lot of people might have expected to see Penn State there. So,
of all years, yeah, this year where it feels like with Shaka Toney and Odafe Owe leaving that you would have a down year, but the transfers did play a huge part in that, in their ranking. Also, Adisa Isaac has done well in small sample sizes, right? As far as his metrics on productivity. Is that what they kind of take us into, what they said about that?
So yeah, obviously, as you kind of alluded to, the transfers were the big thing. Arnold Ebiketie I think he had like an 88.3 pass rush grade last season at Temple, which, I mean, you can probably explain that better than I can, but that's really good. And then, Derek Tangelo, again, from the interior, also had a really nice pass rush grade. I think it was around 78. So yeah. And then, I think with Adisa, it was a little bit more projecting. They kind of talked about his tools a little bit and how he might be, a guy with similar physical gifts to an Odafe Owe type player. So yeah, obviously, I think he had 2 sacks last season and maybe 80 pass rush snaps or so, which, that'll play if he can keep that up at that rate. So I think that's kind of where they stand.
Yeah, and to reference what Dave was talking about, I also work for PFF. It's full disclosure in this conversation. I'm a grading analyst for PFF, and I do a bunch of data collection in various ways. So this is kind of a conversation I'm interested in because of that. But also, I can see it from the non-PFF perspective of people kind of being surprised by this ranking. And one of the things that you mentioned is that the sacks versus the pass rushing percentages, and the metrics as far as his pressure percentage are all pretty good over his career. And one of the interesting things, and I think that this is important context, is PFF weighs pass rush and the passing game way more than the run game. So they don't mind Arnold Ebiketie or Adisa Isaac being sort of undersized players that might not have a complete profile. They're more interested in, can you generate pressure? And both of those guys can do that. So in the right situation, they could be productive. And that kind of leads me to my next question is, do you think that they will be? Do you think that this is going to hold up this year? What's your assessment of the situation at the defensive line position from that pass rushing perspective?
I think they will. I had a really interesting conversation with Eddie McGilvra, who is a defensive pass rush specialist who's based out of California. He trained Arnold Ebiketie this summer. And he basically told me, he works with NFL guys, he's around, and he more or less told me, Arnold Ebiketie can be a top 100 pick in the NFL draft. So, I really think with Arnold specifically, there's a ton of reasons to be excited. I mean, you look at, how athletic he is, you look at his size, I obviously, again, you mentioned the run game might be a little bit of a problem, but from a pass rushing perspective, I mean, he's almost all you can ask for. So yeah, with him, I think I fully expect him to be a really important contributor and a big asset to Penn State in 2021. Go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, I was just I thought you were finished. Continue.
Well, yeah, and you move on to a guy like Adisa, right? And again, you're doing some projecting because there's not a ton of data available, but he has all the physical gifts. He's performed when he's been asked to, when he's been given the chance. So, is he going to have to do a little bit more? Yeah. But yeah, I don't see any reason why, he wouldn't be able to do that. So I think there's reasons to be excited about him too.
And a similar profile early in his career of production in those limited snaps that Odafe Owe had. And we saw kind of how that didn't quite work out, but there's a thousand, that's a whole nother conversation. There's a thousand things that go into that. I want to transition on to one other thing that came out this summer because it generated a lot of talk amongst Penn State football fans. Today, I'm speaking with Dave Eckert, Blue White Illustrated writer. We're here on the BWI Daily Edition, and I want to talk about Sean Clifford and his ranking among the starting quarterbacks in the NCAA. 88th he came in on the PFF list. And again, if you want to check out any of these articles that Dave wrote and give the Penn State perspective on all of this, bwi.rivals.com. Make sure you sign up because we've got a bunch of coverage coming for the Penn State football season, both at the site and here on our multimedia channels, as Dave mentioned, both here on YouTube and in our podcast form. So Sean Clifford, 88th. Do you think that was an overreaction to 2020, or do you think that that's a fair assessment of where Sean Clifford ranks in the landscape of college football quarterbacks?
I think it was a mild overreaction, right? Like, I'm not ready to go full blown, like, it's a joke or whatever, but I do think that, maybe 70th, 60th, somewhere in there might have been more appropriate, especially when you consider some of the group of 5 guys that were ahead of him.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's kind of where I stand. But, look, I mean, it was a bad year. It was a really, really bad year. So you can't get on anybody who is not high on Sean Clifford right now. Right, he didn't do enough last season. We all know that. That's well documented. Anybody who watches Penn State is like intimately familiar with that fact. So I think it was a little bit too low, but I'm not ready to really criticize the ranking, I guess.
It might be just he was the first quarterback that was benched and then regained a starting position. Like the other 87 didn't lose their starting job, and I think that's a fair thing to point out as well. Yeah. But yeah, to me, it felt like this is my biggest issue. I think with the narrative is that Sean Clifford's 2019 wasn't as good as Penn State fans remember or think it was. And again, this is from a PFF perspective of what are you asking the quarterback to do, his individual grade and his individual performance outside outside and segmented from the offense. So it was a decent starting point, but it was not by any means a breakout sort of performance in 2019. So I think if you put those two together and you see the regression in 2020, people tend to not give 2020, I think, the fair assessment for what it was for Penn State football. Do you feel that 2020 had actual implications into the regression in Sean Clifford's game, or do we just see more of when he isn't surrounded by a KJ Hamler and the offense is not familiar to him, this is what happens? What's your feeling on how much you should weigh 2020 in the evaluation?
I mean, I think it needs to be weighed. Obviously, things were not as uniform as we're accustomed to or as we would like them to be. But I mean, it's the data that we have, right? I mean, you can either weigh 2020 fairly, or you can just look at 2019 when he threw, or 2018 when he threw like 4 passes and 3 of them were long touchdowns or whatever it was. I mean,
Yeah.
so if you give me the choice, I'm taking 2020. But obviously we can bring some nuance, right? Kirk Shiraka didn't work out. And Penn State didn't have as much time preseason as they would have liked, I'm sure. I think Clifford said earlier this spring that the first time that he threw to Parker Washington was like 2 weeks before the season. That's not ideal for anyone. So,
right.
you can bring that into the equation while also saying like, that's a 9-game sample that we need to take into account.
Yeah. So where I have had a hard time is I agree with you in terms of we need to take that information and it does need to count. But at the same time, as you just mentioned, he never had a chance to fully install an offense. And football is a hard game, especially at that position. And I don't think people truly understand how hard the quarterback position is from an intelligence standpoint, from an information standpoint, and how much time it takes to acclimate to knowing what you're seeing. But I've said so far this offseason, like there are only so many coverages. Like teams can only do so many things on the back end, and Sean Clifford has not shown a progression in his ability to read those over time. So I really want 2021 to be solid in terms of a case study to find out more about Sean Clifford. I haven't really been able to pin down what my opinion on what he's going to do in 2021 is because of all the variables that we just talked about that are up in the air. Quickly, one last thing on Clifford. Do you see a resurgence from him this year? Do you see a bounce back performance, or do you see him maintaining what we saw last year as far as his ability to operate a brand new offense?
That's an interesting question. I do think that he'll be better, right? I think he has the right mind behind him. A new Penn State offensive coordinator, Mike Yurcich. So, I think that's going to be helpful. He has, a couple of really good wide receivers to rely on. He's losing Pat Fryermuth, which hurts, but if he can just hang on to the football, that's the thing, right? It's going to make a world of a difference. So, and he started to do that toward the end of the season. The turnovers were not as numerous. So, I do think that he'll be better. Do I think he's going to be an asset? I don't know, maybe. I have some doubts, but I do think that he can get to a place where he's not hurting Penn State.
This is such a fascinating conversation. I do want to move on. There's more I want to talk about because there's so much you can do with that from the PFF angle, from just the football angle. Sean Clifford and quarterbacks are always super interesting. And we've got all of that covered in the 2021 Penn State Football Preview issue, a 116-page full-color magazine, a comprehensive guide to the Nittany Lions' upcoming season, packed with exclusive interviews, features, opinions, and analysis from guys like Dave, Ryan, Greg, and Nate. They do a great job. Learn more at comanpub.com/BWI-preview or by calling customer service 814-234-1177 Monday through Friday, 9 to 5. That's 814-234-1177. The peach jam coming up this weekend. I'm not a huge fan of peaches. I actually don't like them as a fruit, but this is not a fruit thing. The peach jam is actually, we're going to talk about some hoops now. Some hoops recruiting news. Dave is our hoops insider. So what's coming up with the Peach Jam? And tell me what it is and what's going on.
So Peach Jam is an annual event down in South Carolina. It's on the Nike EYBL circuit. It's basically one of the centerpiece AAU events of the year. It's 2 weeks long. So we're in the middle of it right now. And most of Penn State's big targets are down there right now. So obviously it's a place where it's a competition that can give us a lot of information about, some of the guys that might be playing for Penn State in a couple of years.
Take us through a couple of the guys that are there and,
Sure.
What their relationship is with Penn State, how Penn State's doing on the recruiting trail.
Right. So, we can start with Kanye Clary. He's Penn State's only commit in the 2022 class as of right now. He's a point guard. He's had, a pretty good showing. He's averaging around 12 points per game, 4 assists, I think he's averaging 2 rebounds. He's got a few steals. So yeah, he plays for Boo Williams on the EYBL. So yeah, he's had a good season, or a good tournament, excuse me. And then a couple other guys that are really showing out are guys like Alex Caravan and Cam Whitmore. Those are both some forwards that Penn State Penn State had on campus over the summer, and is still in contact with. So yeah, they're both averaging over 17 points per game there so far. So that's been good for them. Derek Lively, who is the big name that everybody wants to know about, 5-star center, had Penn State in his top 7, is from Bellefonte. His mom works in Penn State's athletic department. So yeah,
absolutely no issues with recruiting there. There are going to be absolutely no hornet's nest that you have to navigate with that one.
Yeah, so Derek is averaging 5 blocks per game, which is that'll play.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's some guys putting in some work down there. So yeah, there's a few Penn State targets that are really showing out. Actually, Odafe Owe's younger brother, Otega Owe, has he kind of went semi-viral the other day. He had a really emphatic dunk. He plays for Team Final alongside Lively, and also Jameel Brown, who is a point guard target. He was committed to play for Micah Shrewsbury at Purdue. He decommitted when Shrewsbury left. Penn State again had him on campus over the summer. He's had pretty good showing so far too. So yeah, plenty of reasons to be excited if you're Penn State hoops faithful.
Dave Eckert here with me on the BWI Daily Edition. I'm your host, Thomas Frank Carr. You can call me T. Frank. We're talking about hoops with Dave, our hoops insider. What is so 2-part question here. You will have an article recapping the Peach Jam and everything coming up soon, right?
Yes, that is the goal. We're going to try. They separate it. There's pool play, which is what has already happened, and now we're kind of moving into the post pool play section of it. So yeah, I'm going to try to do something soon, recapping how Penn State's key targets did in pool play. So yeah, look for that on bwi.rivals.com.
You beat me to it. I was just going to say that. Perfect. You want to take the seat for a little bit? You want to drive the bus?
Yeah, let's do it.
It's good. That was good. The last thing I want to ask you is Micah Shrewsbury. What's your read on him as a recruiter? Where does Penn State stand now with their new head coach? Because this is kind of a get to know you phase for a lot of people in the Penn State community that probably don't know as much about Micah Shrewsbury. What's your opinion so far of the job he's been doing? If you can assess that all this early on, and kind of what are you getting from Penn State basketball right now?
I think they're off to a good start, right? Kanye Clary he's a player. Don't be fooled by his Rivals rating. He's going to be an asset. So I think Rivals, I don't even know if Rivals has him rated yet. I expect that might change after Peach Jam, where, the analysts get a chance to see him. I'm not sure. But yeah, he's been really good this week. So, that's a big deal. And then you look at the quality of kids that has been on campus for Penn State this summer. Just obviously, Derek Lively kind of fell into their laps just with, his connections to the university. But, the fact that they got him on campus is a big deal. Right. I mean, when are we talking about 5-star prospects being on campus for Penn State basketball? You're just not. So that's a big deal. Cam Whitmore, again, Alex Caravan, 2 really good players that, have an interest in Penn State. So, I think they're off to a good start. Obviously, you'd like to see them fill up that class a little bit because they have a lot of scholarships to fill, specifically with that 2022 class. They're going to have three guys next year who have the option to use their 5th year, the NCAA granted. And if they don't, they're going to have to fill more than half their roster so that's a big class. They're looking to take 5 kids, from my understanding, in that class. So they've got 4 more spaces to fill. So yeah, definitely got some work to do, but I think they've kind of laid a solid foundation, right? I mean, the hoops calendar is much different to the football calendar. So if you're a hoops fan, listening to this, like, there's no reason to panic that Penn State doesn't have this class full yet. You know, the cycle is different. So yeah, I think Penn State fans should be optimistic.
Also, Penn State football for the class of 2022 is just way ahead of most people in terms of they've got their class almost done. There are some classes out there that don't have, 5 people yet. So it's kind of on the extremes on both ends. Dave Eckert, staff writer here at Blue White Illustrated, our Hoops Insider, joining us on the BWI Daily Edition. Thanks so much for coming on, Dave. This was fun.
Yeah, I had a great time. Let's definitely do it again.
All right. Make sure you subscribe to the BWI Daily Edition and all the things we have going on our YouTube channel. Hit the notification button and subscribe and leave a review wherever you get your podcasts. Coming soon, sometime to Apple Podcasts. I'm Thomas Frank Carr, your host. We'll talk to you again tomorrow.